As we can see here, the Red Sea corridor presents unique challenges.
The Red Sea as a structural fault line in maritime power. The escalation in the Red Sea is not a sudden breakdown of order, but the exposure of a long-standing structural vulnerability in the architecture of global maritime power. The attacks on commercial shipping by Yemen's Houthi movement are best understood as the interaction of three enduring forces: the concentration of global trade through narrow choke points, the asymmetry between naval dominance and political restraint, and Iran's mature strategy of indirect confrontation against superior military powers. The Red Sea, linking the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Suez Canal, has become an arena where deterrence norms are tested not by peer navies, but by sub-state actors operating within state-backed networks. Historically, control of maritime choke points has underwritten hegemonic power. British imperial dominance rested on it. U.S. global primacy inherited the same logic. Yet the post-Cold War era introduced a path dependency that now constrains Washington, overwhelming naval superiority paired with a political aversion to escalation against state sponsors. This imbalance has created space for indirect challengers. The Houthis' campaign against shipping does not aim to defeat the U.S. Navy. It aims to impose persistent friction on global trade while remaining below the threshold that would trigger direct war with Iran. The institutional architecture of the states involved clarifies why this dynamic persists. In the United States, President Joe Biden operates within a system designed to prevent rapid escalation. Civilian control of the military, congressional oversight, alliance management, and the shadow of Middle East wars all constrain action. The Department of Defense, under Secretary Lloyd Austin, and U.S. Central Command, led by General Michael Kurilla, retain unmatched kinetic capacity but limited political latitude. Their mission is deterrence without expansion, protection of sea lanes without widening the conflict to Iran itself. This produces a reactive posture, intercepting missiles, striking launch sites, and forming multinational task forces, while avoiding blows that would alter Tehran's cost-benefit calculus decisively. Iran's state power architecture is built for precisely this environment. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei presides over a dual system in which elected institutions exist but do not control strategic security decisions. Those reside with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, particularly its Quds Force, led by Esmail Khani. This structure allows Iran to calibrate pressure through proxies while insulating the regime from direct retaliation. The Houthis, led by Abdul Malik al-Houthi, are not Iranian puppets, but they are embedded within this ecosystem of material support, training, and strategic alignment. Their actions serve Iran's broader objective, contesting U.S. dominance without inviting regime-threatening war. The Red Sea crisis also reflects unresolved regional tensions that predate the current moment. Yemen's civil war fractured sovereignty along the Arabian Peninsula's southern flank, leaving a durable armed actor astride a critical maritime artery. The normalization of attacks on shipping during periods of regional crisis, whether linked to Gaza, sanctions pressure, or U.S.-Iranian standoffs, has established a precedent. Choke points are leverage. Once this logic is activated, it is difficult to reverse without imposing clear costs on the sponsor, not merely the proxy. The present moment constitutes a strategic inflection point because it challenges the credibility of maritime deterrence as a global public good. If a non-state actor can repeatedly disrupt one of the world's most vital trade routes under the umbrella of a regional power, the implications extend far beyond the Red Sea. Power is shifting not through fleet battles, but through the normalization of persistent, deniable coercion. The question now confronting the system is whether naval supremacy without escalation dominance can still sustain order in the world's choke points. The escalation in the Red Sea must be analyzed through the lens of regime survival and elite power, where leadership decisions are conditioned by material constraints and systemic vulnerabilities. In Washington, the imperative is clear: maintain the credibility of maritime deterrence while avoiding entanglement in a broader conflict that could destabilize both the Middle East and domestic political support. President Joe Biden, whose strategic worldview prioritizes multilateral management and calibrated pressure, is constrained by Congress, alliance commitments, and public war fatigue. These institutional pressures shape U.S. responses. Strikes against Houthi missile batteries or drone launch sites are tactical measures designed to signal resolve without provoking direct Iranian retaliation. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and General Michael Kurilla operate within these constraints, balancing kinetic options with the political costs of escalation. This produces a pattern of measured action, reactive strikes, convoy protection, and intelligence sharing with regional partners, rather than decisive campaigns against Iran itself. Iran, conversely, is structured to exploit precisely these constraints. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei maintains a dual-track authority system in which the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, particularly the Quds Force under Ismail Qani, executes strategic initiatives while insulating civilian leadership from risk. By delegating operational responsibility to proxies like the Houthis, Iran exerts asymmetric pressure on U.S. and allied maritime interests while maintaining plausible deniability. The regime's cohesion depends on this operational compartmentalization. The IRGC can escalate pressure to signal strategic intent, while domestic political elites manage sanctions, economic expectations, and ideological legitimacy. This architecture allows Iran to calibrate risk carefully, using indirect naval operations to impose cost without triggering direct conflict that could threaten regime survival. Elite cohesion and fragmentation are central to understanding operational behavior on both sides. In the U.S., interagency coordination between the Department of Defense, the State Department, and intelligence services is robust but slow, reflecting institutional caution under political scrutiny. Conversely, in Tehran, elite cohesion within the IRGC and alignment with Supreme Leader directives enable rapid, precise, and deniable actions. These differences explain the asymmetric tempo of the Red Sea crisis. Iranian proxies act decisively and unpredictably, while U.S. responses are deliberate, measured, and constrained by oversight mechanisms. Economic pressures compound the dynamics of escalation. Sanctions on Iran continue to restrict liquidity and access to international financial systems, but the regime has adapted through regional partnerships and unconventional maritime trade networks. In contrast, disruptions in Red Sea shipping impose indirect economic costs on the U.S., its allies, and global markets, particularly energy and container shipping flows. The U.S. can mitigate some effects through naval escorts and convoy operations, but the structural vulnerability of the choke point ensures persistent exposure. Energy dependencies and logistics constraints reinforce the strategic calculus of both actors. Iran can leverage disruption as a low-cost coercive tool, while the U.S. must weigh the material costs of intervention against political and alliance pressures. The current crisis also reshapes external behavior. U.S. partners in the Gulf and East Africa adjust naval deployments, security protocols, and economic risk assessments, effectively diffusing operational pressure across a broader network. Iran, through the Houthis, tests these adjustments, calibrating attacks to maintain pressure while avoiding a tipping point that would invite comprehensive U.S. retaliation. Leaders on both sides operate under the logic of constrained options. The U.S. seeks to preserve deterrence credibility without escalation, Iran seeks influence without direct confrontation, and the Houthis act as the instrument through which strategic signaling is executed. In sum, the Red Sea escalation illustrates how structural pressures, elite cohesion, and constrained decision-making interact to produce persistent, low-intensity conflict. Leadership decisions are not arbitrary. They reflect systemic imperatives shaped by institutional constraints, economic dependencies, and asymmetric operational opportunities. The crisis demonstrates that power is preserved not by triumphs in open conflict, but by the strategic management of coercion, survival, and calculated risk, a lesson that will resonate across maritime choke points wherever structural vulnerabilities remain. The Red Sea crisis, while confined geographically, carries consequences that extend far beyond immediate maritime security. Its significance lies not in a single tactical engagement, but in the structural recalibration of power relations, norms of deterrence, and the distribution of influence across the Middle East and global maritime systems. The persistent Houthi attacks on commercial shipping under the indirect aegis of Iran reveal a new form of escalation, one that tests naval dominance through sustained disruption rather than decisive fleet action. This logic reshapes the operational environment and forces states to contend with systemic vulnerabilities they cannot eliminate through traditional force projection alone. For the United States, the crisis highlights the limits of naval deterrence. Despite unmatched kinetic capability, the U.S. faces a structural paradox. Overwhelming force cannot guarantee uninterrupted commerce when adversaries exploit deniability, geography, and proxy networks. The operational consequences are evident in the expansion of escort missions, deployment of advanced surveillance systems, and coordination with allied navies to secure choke points. Strategically, however, this creates a diffuse commitment problem. The U.S. must maintain persistent engagement, which strains resources and signals a tolerance for low-intensity disruptions. These measures preserve short-term stability, but may gradually erode the implicit norms that underpin maritime order. If adversaries perceive that denial of access operations carry minimal strategic risk, the threshold for escalation shifts, not only in the Red Sea, but in other critical choke points such as the Strait of Hormuz or the Malacca Strait. Iran's indirect strategy produces a contrasting set of outcomes. By operating through proxies like the Houthis, the regime tests U.S. resolve while avoiding direct confrontation that could threaten domestic stability or provoke regime-targeted retaliation. This form of coercion reinforces internal cohesion, particularly within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, by demonstrating strategic acumen in exploiting systemic weaknesses. The Red Sea also serves as a laboratory for asymmetric naval operations, refining Iran's approach to maritime contestation in ways that can be exported to other theaters. Quds Force Chief Esmail Khani's operational doctrine, emphasizing deniable disruption, cost imposition, and careful calibration of escalation, is reinforced with each incident, solidifying the strategic feedback loop between proxy action and state objectives. The regional consequences extend to Gulf Cooperation Council states, East African littoral states, and global trading partners. States along the Red Sea adjust their maritime and economic policies in response, investing in port security, convoy systems, and regional naval cooperation. The result is a diffusion of burden. Partners absorb some operational costs while the systemic leverage of Iran and its proxies increases. This dynamic also complicates alliance cohesion, as partners balance shared security obligations against domestic economic exposure and political risk. From a systemic perspective, the Red Sea crisis illustrates how contemporary conflicts evolve at the intersection of military asymmetry, economic vulnerability, and institutional constraint. The escalation is not accidental, but a structural product of asymmetric capabilities and strategic patience. Power shifts quietly, control of choke points, and the capacity to impose costs without direct confrontation becomes a form of influence that rivals traditional naval supremacy. This, in turn, informs the calculus of maritime deterrence worldwide, signaling that even dominant powers must navigate a complex interplay of proxies, geography, and institutional limits to maintain order. In the long term, the Red Sea dynamic may normalize indirect maritime confrontation as a standard tool of statecraft. For the United States, the challenge will be sustaining credible deterrence without expanding commitments or undermining global norms. For Iran, the crisis validates a low-cost, high-leverage model of influence that preserves regime survival while projecting power regionally. For the international system, the structural lesson is clear. Choke points remain both strategic linchpins and potential flashpoints, where the interaction of coercion, institutional constraint, and systemic asymmetry can reshape regional stability without a single decisive battle. The Red Sea, therefore, is a crucible of contemporary maritime strategy, where power is not exercised only through ships and missiles, but through the disciplined management of risk, the projection of indirect force, and the persistent testing of adversaries' institutional limits.